Hey y'all, welcome back to Spirit of the Outdoors. Another episode of Just in Time. I know a lot of y'all look forward to these, and I try to make sure that I get one out every Sunday. So if something happens and something comes up, y'all, and I don't get one out, don't crucify me. I had to struggle this week to get one. I found out yesterday that I've got to preach another place. I already knew I was preaching at my local church, which this morning when you see this, and then tonight I've got to preach at another church. So sometimes an old boy has to push to get material together, because I do not like to do what I call canned sermons, something I heard somebody else preach, or something I use this sermon at all. A lot of people, they would take a scripture and they would preach it here, then they would go to church and preach it, and then they would go to another church, preach the same one, all three places. It just don't work that way for me. I like to have what I know is for those people at that time. And right now I've got three different things that I'm in my mind. And for you guys, I was thinking about sacrifice. There's a scripture over in 2 Timothy chapter 3 that I have read numerous times, and it talks about people that in the end days, and it says that they shall have a form of godliness, but deny the power thereof. And you wonder, well, what are they denying? What power are they denying? How do you have a form of godliness and deny the power? Because everybody wants the power. The power is the thing that somebody would want. You look at politics, and a lot of those people go into politics not because they want the money. They're already wealthy. They're after the power. And, you wonder what power that is. How do you deny the power? And in my mind, that is the sacrifice. Sacrifice is where power is. You look at somebody that's making sacrifices to God and for God, there's power in that. For thousands of years, I would assume it was, from the time of creation, God clothed Adam and Eve, and he killed an animal, and I know that they were animals killed, Cain and Abel. They did some, but there was a little bit of sacrifice there, and I don't know exactly how much sacrificing went through under there. The one thing, though, that is never recorded from Genesis chapter 1, from the creation up until Noah stepped off of the ark, was there was never an altar built, a place of sacrifice. This is a continual thing. We know that there was some offerings. We know that Cain and Abel made some offerings. We know that there was some things that went on, but the Bible never really talks about an altar being built, a place that is a monument in my life. Like, this is dedicated to God. This is something that I'm going to do continually. This is not just I did this one time and it's over with. An altar, when you build an altar in your life, you're taking a part of your life and saying, boom, this is for God. This is not for me. This is not for man. This is not to please other people. This is for God. I'm doing this part of my life for God. So where's sacrifice come in our lives? How do we get sacrifice? What are we doing for sacrifice? We don't take a bull and kill it. And I've talked about this briefly in times past. We don't make sacrifices. The thing that is a sacrifice is in Romans chapter 12. It says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Your body is your sacrifice. Everything that you do with your body and say, you know what, I'm not going to partake of this, or I am going to partake of this, and I do this unto God. Those sacrifices that you make is where your power comes from. I have talked a little about sacrifice. I have talked a little about various things, but to put it all together in this video and tell you that holiness in your life, sacrifices you make. I'm not going to partake of this, and I'm going to cut this out of my life. Even though some people would say, oh, there's nothing wrong with that, or I don't see anything wrong with it. If you find somebody that's constantly trying to look for everything that's okay, they're not making sacrifices. Sacrifices, well, it may not be wrong. It might be questionable, but I'm going to cut it out of my life anyway. Whatever it is. I'm not going to sit here in a video and tell you, you can't do this, you can't do that. This is wrong, that's wrong, this is a sin. It don't really work that way. Those rules and guidelines are there for a purpose. But you have to sit down and go, I'm cutting this out of my life to get closer to God. As a sacrifice to God, because my body is a sacrifice. My body belongs to Him now. I am a living altar, walking. I'm a living sacrifice. I put myself on this altar and I give it to God. It's not about, well, this is okay. I don't see nothing wrong with this, or this is not really a sin. Why do you do that? I don't do that. It's a sin, or it's not a sin. And you get all these arguments going on about people saying, well, I don't see nothing wrong with that. At some point, it don't matter if there's anything wrong with it or not. You're supposed to be holy, and you're supposed to say, I'm going to make a sacrifice, and I'm going to be separate. I'm going to be different from the world. I'm not going to do everything that the world does. I'm not going to defile my body with this or that or whatever it may be. If it's something that might be wrong, if it's questionable in the Bible, I'm going to leave it alone. I'm not going to touch it. Those things that have come up in society that we make sacrifices on, that the Bible don't necessarily talk about it, but we know as people that just ain't right. When you sit down in front of a TV and indulge in horror and murder and it's just constantly gore, that's not okay. I realize that there's some old Western movies that I like to watch that they shoot some people in. And y'all, it's questionable whether that's really something that you need to do. But at some point you have to sit down and say, you know what? There's a certain line that I'm going to draw in my life, and I'm going to cut whatever this is out. There's certain movies that I really like. I used to really love to watch Tombstone. I do not watch that movie. Number one, there's entirely too much profanity in it for me. You say, well, the Bible don't really nail down what profanity is. The closer I get to God, the more I don't like something, the more I know that God don't like it. Because the closer I get to Him, the more that the things of the world that I know are not right, I start to feel like, you know what, I don't like that. I've detached myself from a lot of sports. I've detached myself from a lot of music. I have detached myself from a lot of TV. There's certain books that I'm not going to read. It's in everything, because you're constantly filling this body that's a sacrifice with garbage, stuff that is not necessary. I'm going to take this a step further. You need to be careful the things you put in your body. Foods. The Bible talks about gluttony. And if you're going to sit here and throw rocks at the man over here that's drinking a beer, or the man that's done drugs, or the man that's committing adultery, and you're going to talk about how awful that is, you've got to stop and think about gluttony as a sin. So if you sit down at a table and you eat and you just stuff yourself ungodly, that's gluttony. That is wrong. Lying, it's wrong. So when you start picking out things that are wrong, and you start saying, and there's a whole list of rabbit hole you could go down. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you what all I think is wrong and ain't wrong, or how much, because obviously all eating is not wrong. But you have to pay attention to these things. They're written in this word, in this book. And you have to understand that everything that's mentioned in there is mentioned for a reason. There's things that come up today like tattoos and facial hair and all this other stuff that is not in the Bible. They talk about marks over there, and the tattoos is related to a verse in Leviticus that's marks for death, and they were doing things to mourn loved ones that the Bible talked about was wrong in those days. Nothing really throughout the New Testament. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that everybody that has a tattoo is wrong. I will say this, though. God created this body, and he created it the way he wanted it. I would put some deep thought before I went and got a tattoo to, God, are you really okay with this? I'm not going to sit here and tell you that everything that you do is a sin, that you're going to hell over it, because I have no way of knowing who's in hell. But I will tell you this, that every time that you say, you know what, I'm not going to partake of that. I'm not going to do this as a sacrifice. And when you get into the eating, you say, you know what, I'm going to fast a few days, and I'm going to push that plate back, and I'm going to make this as a sacrifice to God. God honors that. I have got some of the greatest anointings when I've preached from times that I said, you know what, I'm going to back the plate off, and I'm going to skip a couple of meals, or I'm going to not eat for a few days, or whatever I choose, and say, this is for God. I'm not going to tell nobody I'm doing it. I'm just going to do it. It's between me and him. It's a sacrifice that I made. And God has always honored that. I can never remember a time that I have done that. God did not honor it. But your body is your sacrifice. It's a living sacrifice. It's a daily sacrifice. It's every day, God, this body is yours, and I'm not going to partake of these things, or I am going to do this for you. I am going to sit down and force myself to read a few scriptures in the Bible every morning. I am going to try to take some time out and sit down and have a good conversation with God today, sometime throughout my day. And that's what I do every day, is a sacrifice. Or God, I'm going to not be in this. I'm not going to be involved in these things. It may be okay, may not be okay. I'm not going to do it, Lord, because I want to make sure that I please you more than I please me. That's sacrifice. Y'all, there's power in sacrifice. When it talks about all those ungodly people in 2 Timothy, it says they deny the power thereof. They denied the sacrifice. They didn't find anything that they needed to cut out of their lives as a sacrifice to God. They just thought, oh, well, God's love and everything's under the blood. God died on the cross and everything is forgiven. He don't expect me to abstain from anything. I just live my life the way I want to. And y'all, it don't work that way. It never has. It never will. A lot of people, they want to think, well, there ain't nothing wrong with this, and these people do it, and you telling me I'm going to hell for this? No, I'm not telling you going to hell over anything. But I am going to tell you one thing. If you stand before God and he says, why didn't you make any sacrifices? What are you going to say? Or if he asks you, where is your sacrifice? What do you have to offer? What are you going to say? Okay, Lord, I sacrificed this. Y'all, if it's easy, it's not a sacrifice. If it's easy to do, if I just left something alone and I didn't want that no way, that's not sacrifice. Sacrifice is cutting some out of your life that your body desires, that your flesh desires, that you hunger for, that you want. I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and we were talking about homosexuality and the gay and lesbian community, and how people say, that you need to accept that, and it's, it was born this way, and I always desired that, and people don't understand that is a spirit that gets attached to somebody. And they made the point, they say, well, I desire men. A man told us, I desire men. I don't really attracted to women. I'm attracted to men, and I have a desire. Well, when you know right from wrong, you have to resist that. Just like the man that desires a woman, he may be married to one woman, and he can't sleep with every woman that he desires to sleep. He desires to sleep with a whole bunch of women. But he abstains from that as a sacrifice, because God said one woman. For every woman, one man. And that is your person. That is your spouse. That is your helpmate. And you have desires for a whole bunch of different women. I have desires. I am human, flesh and blood. When I see a pretty woman, I desire that. But you have to make that sacrifice that, you know what, I'm not going to be part of that. I'm not going to do that, because I have to have control of self. That is my sacrifice. just like people that fight these other spirits. They fight, homosexuality or lesbianism, whatever you want to call it. They have to fight that. They have to resist that. I believe God delivers from those spirits, but you can't just give in to everything that your flesh desires. Just like if you desire all this other stuff that might be questionable, that some people think's wrong, some people think, well, there ain't nothing wrong. How you dress don't really matter, and how you act don't really matter. God's put it all in the blood. You have to resist some of that stuff, because the world said the way is wide and broad, but Jesus said that leads to destruction, that the straight and narrow way is the one that leadeth to life. If it's straight and narrow and few there be that find it, it's not going to be that everything is okay. Everything that every church is doing is not all right. So I hope today that I was able to help you a little bit. I don't want to get off into telling you that everything in the world is wrong and you've got to do this and do that. I'm not going to get on here and do that. I want to leave questions in your mind of where you search this Word of God and you search your heart inside of you, and you find out, God, what do you really expect of me? Because y'all, we've got to grow in this together. We've got to get closer to Him. Every day I try to be a little closer to God than I was yesterday. I need to grow. I need to get closer. I need more of Him, because y'all, we fighting an enemy in this world that is powerful. The Bible said it is like a roaring lion walketh about seeking whom he may devour. Satan wants to have you. The Bible said to sift you as wheat. He wants to destroy you. He wants to mislead you. He wants to lie to you. He wants to convince you that everything is all right, that there's nothing is wrong, there is no sin, and you're all right. None of us all right. We all have to make some sacrifices. We've all got to do some work. We've all got to try to put forth some effort into this. Because if those old guys back in the Bible had to kill animals and make blood sacrifices and go through a lot of work, He expects something of us. It's not a free ride. I promise you it's not. So I hope I'm able to help you. Thank you for watching Spirit Outdoors. Remember, if you do a little better today than you did yesterday, tomorrow will be a better day. We'll see y'all. Y'all have a good one.